Hi everybody! Alright, so I am getting ready to sew the first couple rows of the Tumbling Cosmos pattern, and I'm going to do this, at least to start, we'll see what I do down the road in the future, in a non-traditional way. So if I was doing this, actually you can do it, I was gonna say if I do it on the go I might not do it this way, but I actually have boards that I made with batting on them so that I can lay this out and see each section as I go. So I really try not to break thread when I'm sewing, and doing the tumbling blocks you're going to cut a lot of thread. So the way most people are probably doing it is sewing each block together so that they know this is A1, this is A2, etc, etc. So what you would do is you would sew one seam, and then maybe your second seam, then you would have to cut thread, and then you sew the short seam and cut thread. What I am planning on doing is actually sewing these in groups of 4, and that way I can hopefully cut a little bit less thread. And I have not quite planned out my pattern exactly, and I'm sure it'll probably be different every time I do it, maybe not, but right now my plan is to go here down to here and then at least up here, so that'll get me 3 seams. If I have enough thread, I'll probably go up 1 more. And so that's obviously not the traditional way to do it because I'm including the top of the next row into my stitching right now. And so the best way to do this is to just lay it out, and as you stitch each seam, lay it out again, pick up the next piece, stitch it, lay it out again, okay? Because either way you're going to want to do that. Even if you're doing the 3, you're going to want to put it down, lay it out, make sure that you're getting everything in the right spot. And you know, if I had each of these blocks sewn, I'm still gonna have to break thread because you have still a Y seam. The Y seam is where you break thread. So you'd have to do 1 thread here and maybe sew a whole row, and yes, maybe this row you could go, but then you have a long row you're trying to flip over and under and over and under. So I just think this is probably gonna be a little easier to kind of do it in blocks of 4 and then have those set aside to stitch to each other. So we'll see how that works out for me. Could come out totally terrible, who knows. And if you notice, I actually had my stripe upside down here. I just double checked everything, and the wide part should be on the bottom. So you know, this is why you lay it out. Even if I was just stitching this block, I'd want it laid out anyways, even though I have it labeled, you know, with that. It's confusing. This is a confusing quilt no matter what. So we are going to go ahead and start here, and I'm going to want to sew this seam, and I want to go from this edge to the middle. So I'm going to put my sew tight a little closer to that edge so that I know that's the edge I'm sewing, and then I'm going to go ahead and sew down to here. So we'll do that in fast motion, and I'll show you how we're going to determine the next piece we're going to sew in. Okay, so I stitched the first seam. We went down to the middle here, and I'm going to go ahead and go down. So this is still the traditional way to do it. If you want to do it the traditional way, totally do that. Cut your threads. If it makes, you know, your brain work a little better, then that's totally fine. But the next one going down will be here. This is still the traditional way. If you're going to do a traditional block, you would cut your thread here and then come back in and sew this, and then you would have your block all together and then move on to the next block. But I'm going to show you where I'm going to go next after I do this seam. Okay, so I sewed these two seams. I went over here, down here, and I thought about it. I was planning on going into row B, but I have a different plan that I think will work really good. So like I said, I try not to cut my threads too much, but I think if I can get away with at least going two seams. So normally if I was to do this block, I'd have to do this one seam, cut my thread, and then I would do again two, then one, cut my thread, and then eventually I'd be setting in the rows, so I'd have to do one here, cut my thread. I think I can get away with doing at least two seams every single time without having to do this single seam. So what we're going to do is connect the row as we go. So I'm going to cut my thread from here rather than continuing down into B. I'm going to restart here. I'm going to go up, and then I'm going to go down. So this piece of the second block will get connected to here. Then I can go my same two seams I did here, across here and down. And then again, I'll go up and then connect the next block here. So basically I'm connecting the row as I go rather than having to do that after. And I'm getting two seams out of every thread rather than, so that none of them will be one. And I have a really good idea for how to connect the row B, the lower row as well, kind of in a similar fashion. So make sure you stay tuned for that. I will go ahead and connect 3 of these, and then I will show you how I'm going to set in the second row. But I think what I would do, I'm going to do 3 just so that I can show you how I'm going to do row B. But what I would do is this 2 seam, 2 seam, 2 seam all the way to the end. You'll probably just have, at the very last block, you'll have one that has 1 seam because obviously it doesn't continue to the, we don't have the other section. So I would do the whole row, and then I would use my method for setting in the next row that I'm going to show you. But I'll do it in pieces just so that we can get it in this video for you. So let me go ahead. So the next thing I'm going to sew is this seam and then down. And that's what we're going to work on next. So I just wanted to give one tip as I'm doing this. So because I didn't break my thread and I'm continuing down this next one, I do not tie a knot at the beginning here. I just continue on stitching. That way, if for some reason I have to unstitch this line, I don't have to contend with a knot at the beginning. But I did knot off on the end of the line of the last stitch block, because that way, again, if I have to unstitch this line, that last block is knotted at the end so that it will not become undone. And of course I got a knot in here. I'll get that out in a minute. But anyways, so I just keep going. I don't tie a knot. I did tie a knot on the last line just because if I undo this stitching, I don't have to worry about that other stitching becoming undone. So that's what I do. And then when I get to the end of this, I will tie a knot because we'll be cutting off. So that's kind of the reason why I don't really like breaking thread too much, because if you're continuing on, you don't have to cut your, you don't have to tie a knot. So it's like one less step. But that's fine. If we do two, that still saves me a bunch of knots of having to do those one-offs all the time. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna get this figured out and then keep going and tie my knot at the end. So I have reached the end of my line. I went through my last stitch at the end here. I'm going to go through the exact same spot again, and this is how I tie my knots. Is I make a loop and then I feed my, I don't know if you can see that, feed my needle through that loop 3 times. You can do it 2 or 3 times. I like 3 personally. And then pull it tight. It was a little harder for me because I accidentally put a knot in my thread, so if you don't have that, obviously it'll slide down a lot easier. But that's it. And so this is the end of my second line, so I can go ahead and cut that off. And we will open this up and see if we did a good job. Yeah, it looks good. Yay. All right, so then, and the nice thing is with just doing 2 lines, and you definitely should, cut your threads a little bit shorter too, so you don't have to work with so much thread and then it won't get tangled. Mine was a little long last time. So we're gonna go ahead and do this way again. So these 2 lines, and then once that's done, we'll add our 3rd block and do that. And I think this is gonna be a really nice way of putting these rows together. So I will go ahead and stitch these. Again, when you start, you do that same knot that I just showed at the end. I do not tie a knot in the end of my actual thread. All I do is leave my thread just as it is, fold it over about halfway, but leave one side a little longer. And then I do 1 stitch, and then the 2nd stitch with the loop, go through it 3 times, pull it taut. And then I do not also, and in this quilt, I'm not stitching my tail in, I just leave my tails loose. So, but you can see, look at my, I know people like to see the back. So these are my tails. They all spin the same way. So they're kind of, this tail's going here, this tail's going here, and this tail's going here. So that's what the back should look like. Obviously I pull my tails back when I'm stitching, so, but you can starch those and they'll go right back down. But yeah, so those are my tips for stitching. If you have any questions, about how I stitch and stuff, you can just ask in the comments. I'm gonna obviously be stitching this whole quilt, so I can give some more tips in another video as well. But I will go ahead and do all this stitching for this. Like I said, I'm gonna do 3 blocks. I'm gonna do that off camera instead of on the fast camera, just so I can hang out with my husband. And then once I have these 3 together, I'll show my idea for how I'm gonna set in the next row as well. So we will see you in just a minute once I have these all stitched together. Thanks, guys. Okay, so I decided to go ahead and finish row A before I show how I'm gonna attach row B, but I just wanted to just show the work in progress just so you can kind of see how I'm doing this. So again, like I said, I'm doing 2 sides at a time. So what that means is, rather than building just individual blocks and then having to stitch them together with just one side and having to cut my thread and tie 2 knots and all that stuff, I'm building the row as I go. So this block is done, and rather than just attaching this whole block as one piece, I'm attaching the left side, and then my next step will be to attach the top here, come down to the right, and then cut my thread there. So every single one of these that I'm doing, I'm getting 2 sides off of the thread. So this is my 5th block, so then again we'll do this and then down to the 6th block for that first piece. So that's how I'm gonna attach all of my rows, and I think it just makes a little bit more sense. It flows really well and it gets the row done all at once rather than having to do each block and then attach the blocks to each other. And I will show you once I finish row A how I plan on attaching row B and working my way down the quilt. Okay, so before I finish off the last seam, so I just have this one last seam left on row A, I just wanted to take a quick video to show you. So I did all the 2 lengths, and then this will be the only one that will have 1 stitched length. So I think I like this method a lot better because it just, the flow is better than making each of these individually and then trying to stitch them together with that 1 length, tying a knot on each side and all of that. So I will finish off this last little piece. I just wanted to show you that that was the last piece there, and we'll move on to row B. Okay, so I have finished row A completely, and now we're going to work on row B. So again, I'm going to be doing this non-traditionally. You can still travel with this, just do 1 block at a time, just like you would if you were actually stitching these blocks all together. So the way most people do these types of quilts is they stitch this into a tumbling block and then eventually stitch it in, but I'm doing that a lot differently. So what I'm going to do, I'm trying to have 2 seams every time I sew instead of having to cut my thread on just one side. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to stitch this top right into the bottom of row A. So that'll be my 2 seams there. Then I'll come back down and I'll stitch this one, this seam, and then this seam. That'll be my 2 seams, just like I did with row A. Then I'll do this seam and this seam. So again, same as what I did up here. And then I'll stitch this top end, so that's all set in. And then we'll keep going. We'll go down here like this, and then down and down, and keep going that way. So I'll show you each step as I do it so you can kind of understand, because I know this is a very different way of stitching this particular quilt. So this will build the top as you go, because we're going to do this for each row, and it should be pretty easy since they're in sections to keep it all together. And as we get paper surrounded, we'll take them out so that it's easier to keep going, but we'll show that whole process as we build. But I will go ahead and get started on row B. We're going to do this first stitching, and then I'll show you what that looks like when I'm done. Okay, so just real quick, so you can see I set in the top of B1, and my next step will be to stitch the 2 lines. Like I said, we're trying to find a way to always stitch 2 lines every time we do a piece. So that's what we're going to do next, is stitch these 2 lines, and then the next one will be these 2 lines. And I'll do a real quick video after I do each one, just so you can kind of see how it's getting attached. So just real quick, so we have this line and this line attached, again, done without breaking our thread, so we get the 2 lines. And so our next step is going to be this line to finish this cube, and then I have B2 set up in the order it's supposed to be in. So it'll be this line and then down on B2, and I'll show you that in just a second. All right, so this seam and this seam have now been stitched, so our next step is going to be stitching the next top in, and the way that we're going to do that is just go over the top. So we're going to do these 2 seams here. That'll be our next step, and then we just keep going on the bottom, same as we did with the first one. So we'll do these 2 seams and then pull out B3 and go up and down and attach B3 there. So that's basically how I'm going to do each and every row. I think it's a lot easier to have 2 seams to stitch at once, and it's a lot less fiddly and trying to figure out which way the the block goes and everything like that by stitching each piece in at a time. So hopefully this tutorial made sense for how I'm stitching these together. I know it's kind of a long video and this is totally a different way than most people are doing it, but if you have any questions, please feel free to comment below this video. Make sure you do subscribe to my channel, as I do post videos pretty sporadically. And hopefully this was a help to you on how to stitch the tumbling cosmos together. Thanks everybody.